Earlier this year, we put together a list of critically acclaimed games that no one had played, or rather games that massively undersold beneath expectations, or games that are massively underrated, because obviously there aren't any games that nobody's played, or at least none that I could tell you about. You guys were a pretty big fan of being taken down memory lane and had plenty of your own ideas to offer up more excellent games that missed their chance in the sun for one reason or another. So I mined every single one of your comments to put together another list that represented your picks for incredible yet underrated and underappreciated games that more people need to play. I'm Jess from WhatCulture, and here are 10 critically acclaimed video games no one played, commenter edition. Number 10, Jet Force Gemini. One of your top underrated picks from the comments of our original list was 1999 third-person shooter Jet Force Gemini. This Nintendo 64 game was developed by none other than Rare, but was ultimately overshadowed by a handful of other heavier hitters in the late 90s and early 2000s. The game had you stepping in the shoes of Juno, Vela, and Lupus as they defend the galaxy from a wave of space insects led by the big bad Mizar. Jet Force Gemini offered up a mix of shooting, platforming, adventuring, and puzzle solving, and managed to hit the nail on the head with all of those features. The engaging mechanics woven into an interesting story dotted with charismatic characters made this a hit for those who played it. Despite stellar review scores, some publications deemed it too tedious, while others claimed the control schemes were too complicated. Due to the pile of stellar games available on the N64, this one didn't hit everybody's radar at the time. Fortunately, it is now included as a part of the Rare Replay bundle, so if you did miss out on it then, you can still play it now. Number 9, Zero Escape. Another title that featured soaring critical acclaim but relatively mild commercial success was Zero Escape: Virtue's Last Reward and the Zero Escape series as a whole. Technically, this kicked off with 2009 visual novel 9 Hours, 9 Persons, 9 Doors, where players would complete puzzles and escape room type scenarios and read the narrative in a more traditional visual novel format. The adventure game was praised for its enigmatic and thrilling story as well as its satisfying puzzles. Despite standing as a strong example of the capabilities of video game storytelling, particularly at a time when the medium's ability to pull that off was still somewhat in question, the series was actually a commercial failure in Japan. The first 2 games underperformed, selling only 27,762 copies and 14,023 copies in their respective debut years. Sales picked up with localization for its Western release and further platforms upon which the series has become available, but even over a decade later, the 3-installment series has sold only 500,000 copies in its entirety. Despite these somewhat lackluster sales figures, much like Jet Force Gemini, the series has absolutely garnered a cult following from a dedicated fan base in its own right. Number 8, The Longest Journey. A couple of you noticed me slip in The Longest Journey as an afterthought on our last list, where I mentioned it happens to be my favorite game of all time. Well, it's wildly critically acclaimed, and yet almost no one has heard of it, let alone played it, so let's talk about it. Admittedly, adopting the adventure game genre is already going to lock out a bunch of gamers who wouldn't look twice at an adventure game given it's a little more niche than other genres, but in the year 2000, it was having a well-earned renaissance. While this is great for fans, it can be a problem for under-the-radar titles when the genre is already oversaturated. The Longest Journey tells the story of April Ryan as she goes on a fantastical adventure between 2 parallel worlds representing science and magic respectively. The story is extraordinarily ambitious, the characters unique, and the point-and-click adventure game elements are nuanced and often genuinely challenging. Despite eventually finding a strong following among adventure game fans, the game struggled at the gate due to its original release in Norway and subsequent struggle to obtain a North American publisher. The game was also given a massive budget by publisher Funcom, meaning it had to sell 150,000 copies just to break even. The game originally sold 100,000 copies in Europe after 4 months on shelves, but was initially only able to move 12,495 units in its first month on sale in North America. It was only due to strong word-of-mouth marketing and great reviews that the studio was able to turn it around and eventually sell almost 500,000 units 3 years after launch. In IGN's Best of 2000 awards, they granted The Longest Journey the accolade for the best game no one played. So who are we not to include it here?
Next up, this video is brought to you by The Valiant, Kite Games and THQ Nordic squad-based RTS now on consoles. With a range of units from tanky swordsmen to speedy cavalry, alongside some really intense and rewarding multiplayer that you can see myself, Josh and Jules playing here, are 15 exciting handcrafted single-player missions. Seeing your hero squads and auxiliary teams battle to victory each comes with custom cinematics, narrated journals, difficulty levels, and more. A large array of weapons and armor can be looted and equipped across the campaign too, each coming with their own stats and powerful specials. 3 different skill trees map over 5 hero squads to provide players with unique passive and active abilities to level up their characters. Combine hero skills, weapons, and equipment for a huge selection of builds, and play cooperatively with friends in the 3-player last man standing mode. Here you'll face hordes of enemies together, earning experience to level up your knights and unlock new skills and cosmetics. Competitive PvP game modes support 1v1 and 2v2 with cosmetic meta progression and special rewards for ranked play. Try the free multiplayer demo for The Valiant right now on either the European, Japanese, or American PlayStation Store. The Valiant is out now. Back to the video.
Number 7. Beyond Good and Evil. The Ubisoft action-adventure that puts you in the shoes of a green-favouring photojournalist alongside her father figure pig pal Paige may be a household name now, but Beyond Good and Evil had a lot of trouble getting attention when it launched in 2003. Despite being critically acclaimed and garnering a well-deserved cult following, at launch the game was actually considered a commercial failure. The game has been praised for its compelling anti-propaganda story, fantastic world replete with larger-than-life characters and enemies, and engaging combat, immersive world design, and evocative soundtrack. Despite all of that and plenty of stellar reviews, many people missed out on Jade's epic journey. It sold poorly in its holiday launch window, at which point its price was slashed by up to 80%, in a desperate attempt by retailers to move units. This was due to a number of factors, but most importantly the oversaturation of the video game market at the time, and Ubisoft's decision to market Prince of Persia: Sands of Time more heavily than Beyond Good and Evil because they were confused as to how to advertise the latter. The game won a decent handful of awards as well as a cult following, but its poor sales prevented it from becoming the trilogy it was envisioned to be, and the jury's out on whether we'll hear more about its sequel, which has now been in development for 16 years. Number 6. Battlezone. Where Zero Escape and The Longest Journey stood as sorely underrated examples of what a video game's story could accomplish, 1998's Battlezone set the stage on how to effectively combine shooter elements with those of a real-time strategy game. Not only that, the game was the first to combine the two genres and prove that it could actually work, and according to most of the stellar reviews, it absolutely did. Though the game was praised for its clever genre integration, interface, ingenuity, thrilling multiplayer, and lovely graphics, the game just couldn't make it off shelves. The game sold only 48,000 copies between March and November in its release year, and global sales had only reached 200,000 by the following June. Developer Pandemic claimed Battlezone underperformed considerably, selling below their expectations, for which they blamed the game's branding, failed marketing, and unusual design, which made it difficult to attract players. Number 5. Before Your Eyes. Another game that flew disappointingly under the radar due to the misfortune of just being a little bit too unique is Before Your Eyes by Goodbye World Games. Of course, for those who played it, there was nothing too unique about it, as that's exactly what makes this adventure title so special. You'll assume the role of a deceased soul traveling through memories, and the game actually utilizes eye tracking through your webcam to track what catches your eye and when you blink. The feature works remarkably well mechanically, as well as delivering a lovely ludonarrative harmony that immerses you within the story by having it change and transform along with your movements in real life. Naturally, an adventure title that had such a unique premise and an even more unique set of mechanics had a little bit of trouble finding an audience. That was precisely the case here, but those who've contributed to its Steam user review score, which currently stands at a 10 out of 10, would encourage you not to miss out on this BAFTA-winning adventure, even if this is the first you've heard of it. Number 4. Robot Alchemic Drive. It shouldn't come as a surprise that another slam dunk from the 2000s has flown under the radar, since according to this list alone, that was just a banger time for video games. The PS2 action game Robot Alchemic Drive, also known as RAD or Gigantic Drive in Japan, had you taking control of a gigantic robot named a Mega Knight. Not that we need a reason to control a big robot, but in this case you were doing so to protect humanity against a mechanical alien race called the Volgara. The game scored highly across the board, yet it only sold 17,888 copies in its launch window in Japan. Despite impressing many with a healthy handful of gameplay innovations and clever mechanics, the game struggled to find a market outside of Japan, largely due to issues with localization and challenges in relation to its marketing. That said, your game enthusiast pals who are really big on mech-themed games have probably checked this one out or at least heard of it. Number 3, the NEVERHOOD. While this list is largely compiled at this point of games that were a little too weird for their own good, but we still love them for it, the NEVERHOOD is a perfect entrant into that category. The 1996 point-and-click adventure game is a particularly weird one, as we follow protagonist Clayman as he explores a world made entirely out of clay. You'll generally solve puzzles through actions and employing elements of your environment as opposed to utilizing items from an inventory, and watch video sequences that carry you through the plot. The unique adventure is quirky and genuinely funny, and its visuals are charmingly different from what most other games have on offer. While the game was criticized by some for being overly difficult, largely it received rave review scores, and much later on in 2011 would even score the 35th slot on Adventure Gamer's Best Adventure Games of All Time list. All of that success notwithstanding, the game did absolutely struggle to find an audience and was ultimately commercially unsuccessful. It was reported that many large game retailers such as Target were not even carrying the game, and by April of 1999, the NEVERHOOD had only managed to sell 41,073 copies, a figure that CNET called embarrassing. Curiously, the game eventually found a large fan base in Russia and Iran due to mass bootleg copying and distribution of pre-installed games on computers, as it was included on gateway machines at the time. Number 2, Giant's Citizen KABUTO. A bunch of comments on our last video asked for this one to be included if we ever made a commenters edition, so here you go, I'm here to provide. It's Giant's Citizen KABUTO by Planet Moon Studios. This 2000 third-person shooter works in real-time strategy elements as you take control of one of 3 characters, each from a different race. You can play through the story campaign or compete in multiplayer matches, and the title refers to the KABUTO, which is a massive behemoth capable of brutal melee attacks. Critics praised the game's gorgeous graphics, humorous story and dialogue, and successful genre blending, as well as gripping mechanics. Though sales were disappointing, the game garnered a well-deserved cult following in later years thanks to consistently high reviews, and its legacy is clearly continued, according to critics such as GameZone's Andrew Groen, who stated that Giant's approach to storytelling and mechanics even inspired the likes of Ratchet & Clank and Jak and Daxter. Number 1, SHADDAI Ascension of the Metatron. Last but certainly not least, we have 2011 action-adventure SHADDAI Ascension of the Metatron. The game revolves around Enoch, who's been sent from God to find 7 angels fallen from heaven and attempt to hold a great flood at bay in order to save humanity. The game received masses of praise for its stunning blend of 2D and 3D art, unique aesthetic, visceral combat, satisfying platforming challenges, and compelling narrative. Despite making considerable waves in the critical sphere and among those who picked it up, in addition to an extensive promotional campaign, SHADDAI saw particularly low sales. In its first year of release, the game sold less than 100,000 units, resulting in the closure of the development studio Ignition Tokyo, for which this was their only shipped game. Disappointingly, plans for sequels were subsequently scrapped, though the IP was purchased in 2013 by the original character designer no less, who helped create a follow-up called The Lost Child, which released in 2017. Which would be an awesome way to end this list, except that apparently it was a shadow of its former self, so probably not worth checking out. That said, while that is a downer note, now you have a whole list of games to go check out if you're looking for something. That's the end of our list, but do let me know down in that comment section if we've still managed to miss your pick for a critically acclaimed game not enough people have played. As always, I've been Jess from WhatCulture. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. If you like, you can come say hello to me on Twitter or X, where I'm at Jess McDonald, and make sure you stay tuned with us here for plenty more gaming goodness.